Hey guys, today I want to talk all about the ego. Now, the ego can have a negative connotation and it can take us down all different types of holes to understand. But today I want to simplify it so that you can better understand what is the difference between a fragile ego, an inflated ego, and what you can do to come back into that healthy self-concept. Now, I went down a rabbit hole of this content for what feels like months and exploring different aspects of what does the ego mean. I deliberately wanted to understand the spiritual and the empath side of the ego so that I can help my clients have a bit of direction in what's going on when they go off track and when they're feeling out of alignment. 9 times out of 10, that's when the ego is really pushing in on how they should be in their life. I got to say, the thing that triggered me into having a look at the ego was a friend had said to me about, or we were talking about a medium, and she had said, "Oh, what do you think of such and such? I think he's all in his ego." And I was like, hmm, you right now sound like you're in your ego, judging the other person's ego. And then I went, oh my gosh, now I'm in my ego, judging his ego. And it's just like, what is going on? However, that sparked some of the most fascinating conversations I've had with friends ever since then. So, the ego. Let's have a look at what you can do about it, again, to come into that healthy, sacred neutral. So let's explore first what is the ego. So that healthy ego consists of multiple components. It includes your self-image, how you see yourself, your self-esteem, like how you feel about yourself, and your ideal self. So the emotions, your mental well-being, all of those things. So your ego consists of multiple components, and really it's all about how the mind perceives who you are in this reality. So the ego, again, is a fascinating conversation, especially with those spiritual people who really want to understand where you can take this. Sometimes when you encounter someone who appears to be overly confident, self-important, a bit arrogant, it's quite easy to label them to have a big ego. That grand display can be quite off-putting, especially to those who would feel a bit intimidated or insecure about themselves. And again, this is where the ego is actually misunderstood because all of those judgments about their self-importance and who they are on stage is actually your ego pushing up against some interesting triggers. So there's definitely that scale or that spectrum of, again, fragile ego, that empath fragile ego, and then like that narcissistic inflated ego. And when we look at it, they're on the same stick, just do two different ends. The spiritual alignment, raising your consciousness, is to actually resolve and dissolve the ego's grip so that you come back to that neutral perspective. And again, we'll go into a lot more detail about that. So, again, the ego relates to your sense of self, and it's going to play a crucial role in your identity and how you interact with this world. So, that soul having a human experience, you can't be here on earth in a human body without the ego. The two go hand in hand. But again, where are you on that spectrum of unhealthy and healthy ego? So, when I ask you that question, like, who are you? It's a mind-boggling question that no one can actually answer. You can't answer it because you are having an experience of reality from your internal perspective. And we have people outside of us who have a whole different concept of who we are based on their representation of the world. So we're doing very multidimensional things. When I heard Byron Katie talk about, ego and healing and questioning, is this true? How do you respond when you think the thought? Going down that path of, that ego's experience of reality. I heard Byron Katie once say, there's me. And then when I step into an audience of, 400 or 1,000 people, there's now 1,000 different versions of me. I was really confused by that for some time, going, what is she talking about? But this is it. This is where you have your internal experience of reality. That's your ego operating that. And then everybody else's ego is operating and they have a different perspective of who you are. And so, yeah, thought provoking, right? Again, no wonder this topic can be confusing. The When we talk about the ego and the human experience of this reality, we also need to consider your soul's experience of this human reality. Your soul is that ever present being of light who can travel throughout all times, dimensions, and frequencies. It's often considered that essence of that higher consciousness version of you. And it's in that ever present moment of light, just moving throughout all types of realms, realities. So we've got that soul that's in like the spirit world or higher realms. You've made that decision to come in to experience human form. And the minute that you've decided to come into a human body, you're now attached to the laws around the human earthly experience. Here on Earth, we are governed by time, linear time, and we're also governed by polarity, love, hate, light and dark. That human experience here means that we get to experience time. And that's actually when our ego is in operation. Anytime the mind is reflecting on the past, we are now in the ego. We're reflecting back on the past. We've gone into the linear version of this reality, having a look at the past. And somebody who experiences things like depression, depression of the mind, is that so much of their energy is in the problems of the past. And likewise, if you're spending so much time in the future, where your ego is operating in the future, this is when that can manifest into things like anxiety. There's so much of your energy focused on the worst case scenario in the future. And again, when we look at both sides of this, the ego is ensuring our survival, looking out for the worst case scenario, worrying about other people's judgments, worrying about how do I belong, how do I survive, how do I fit into this construct. Whereas your soul at that healthier level doesn't operate within the laws of being here on earth, doesn't operate from fear, doesn't operate from competition, comparison, scarcity, lack, resentment, anger. All of that is that human ego stuff that's operating. And so when you're doing things like coaching or healing, we're looking at having healthy levels of fear rather than being dominated by fear, or healthy levels of healthy levels of who you are in this now moment. So the next chapter that I had a look at is if we are in this ego construct, when did the ego actually get created? What's going on here? Because when you actually narrow it down again, the ego is created the moment, the moment that you realize you were separate from your mum. So choosing to be here in that earthly body, at the spirit world, contract table, choosing your parents, choosing your soul's contract, choosing all the things that you want to learn. You then choose to come in through that portal of energy into your mother's womb, and you are now actually operating by her ego. You believe from your level of consciousness that you are her, she is you, you are inseparate. And so there's a moment there around the time when you're a toddler where you recognize I'm actually separate from mum. I get to say no, I get to do what I want to do. But this is also when the ego is going to start to uh, grab a grasp. It's going to create all sorts of different chaos where it craves to be with family, to belong, to be part of the tribe in order for your survival. And it also craves individuality because you are now separate from your mum. So you've got this lifelong battle of, do I belong? How do I be an individual? How do I how do I minimize the fear of separation versus how do I step into the authentic version of me free from rejection, free from judgment. So the ego, when you're doing that healing journey, is looking at all of the things that the ego is holding on to, again, to ensure your survival. Again, fascinating. So again, the ego there, all about ensuring your survival, regardless of the suffering, yet it wants to belong, be right? And I think if you consider your childhood, the childhood programs you've taken on from mum or from your caregivers about, saying please, saying thank you, having good manners, how to be polite in this world. When you think about those types of programs when you were a child, that was the program created to ensure your survival. That's how we are in this world. And yet those programs don't work well when you're some of those programs, I should say, don't work well when you're in a different kind of setting. So if your mum has this belief about having good manners so that she belongs, having good manners so that she gets the approval from other people. Oh, your child's so wonderful. They've got such good manners. That's all beating her ego. And now she's going to get you to be more of what she needs you to be to help her identity as a mum. Again, it can be so confusing here, but this is where coaching side of things steps in to say, well, it's an interesting point of view you've got, mum, but I actually want to operate differently now. I don't actually want to be a people pleaser. I don't need to get that value from other people praising me. I want to go do what's important to me. Where a quick scenario that's coming up is somebody who wants to be that artist and be creative and do all of the fun things, and yet the family says, oh no, about security, what about money, what about having a good job? And so the egos in clash with each other, and that's where you have to look at the gap between going what's going on here, the fear of judgment, so on and so forth. Anyway, I found this absolutely fascinating when I was exploring what the ego is and how I can use this information to better help my clients. When we think about the ego and how it holds us back, it is having that singular point of view. Think about, going to the movies, you see a story playing out, it is a single story, rigid perspective. The narrative is what the narrative is. That's like your ego. Somewhere along the line you have that spiritual awakening where you're like the audience in the movie and you start to go, wait a minute, there's something a bit screwy about this movie. What are the other possibilities? What happens to other movies in other cinemas? Like, what is going on here? And so when you start to have that spiritual awakening, you start to recognize that the truth that you were living to may not be the truth now. And so that's where that spiritual awakening starts to emerge about who you are from a higher level of consciousness. Quite fascinating again, because then we could go down a whole path of spiral dynamics and how your consciousness raises, but I'll keep it as simple as I can. So, from that spiritual perspective, we start to recognize like that saying that like if a tree falls in a forest and no one hears it, does it make a sound? Very quickly the ego is going to say, of course it makes a sound because that fits into my narrative, that fits into my movie. But this is where we start to recognize that with that self-awareness, if there's not a person there or the sensory ears to pick up on the sound, if that consciousness or that being isn't there or the measuring device isn't there to measure the sound, then it will fall, there'll be a vibration. But sound, does it exist? It's a whole different conversation, right? Anyway, so then when you start to move more and more and more away from the cinema of your ego experience, you then start to realize on your spiritual awakening that there's a whole projector room, which is like the spirit world. Everybody's playing their role, everybody's giving it a go, everyone's doing the best they can. We've got spirit guides who are involved from higher dimensions. We've got the people or the souls who volunteered to be here on Earth. Like the projector room says that you are the producer, you're the actor, you're the everything. And again, you get to choose the truth that you want to live to. So hopefully that sort of illustrates what's going on here when it comes to the ego, who you are, why you have such battles with different perspectives, where your consciousness is going. The Because the ego itself can create all sorts of different emotions. Now, some of these egotistic emotions can be things like distress, fear, anger, sadness, guilt, shame, judgment, insecurity, anxiety, mental chatter, everything there of the mind that's trying to ensure your survival is your ego. Now, in a coaching experience, we don't want to resolve and dissolve things like anger completely. Something like anger, where you want to, if something happened to you, if something happened to your child, we would want that instinctive, healthy anger for you to step up and like or to protect your children. But the anger where something's happened to you years ago and it's still seething and it's still coming up, that's the unhealthy level of anger. That's your ego stepping in to really mess with your experience of reality. And it's not doing it at a manipulative way, but it's doing it to, again, to ensure your survival. This is where people who have that narcissistic kind of tendency, those inflated egos, have gone down a different path where they're so hungry for the power and the control and the domination and the competition to be their best because again that ensures their survival, so they're operating at a different level of ego rules. So when you have people who are lawmakers and they're like, okay, these are the rules based on what's fair and what's just and what's right, those people will want to test it because they don't want somebody else having the power over them. They want to be able to have that sense of security by, again, being in that power. So there's that grandiose sense of self-importance, that sense of entitlement. Yeah, even the blame shifting, the emotional blackmail, anything that their ego can do to rule the show, basically. So you want to watch out for why you're attracting in people like that. If that's been your experience, what is it reflecting in you that where the empaths are natural fixers and givers and want to help and serve. So a lot of the times when they're seeing somebody struggle with that power dynamic, they want to fix and help and bring them emotional support to get them to calm down or to get them to see a different perspective. Mm. The empath's ego is now pulling in some pretty heavy duty soul contracts and life challenges that actually don't need to be there. So when you have that self-worth and that self-concept tied up into how much you can give, serve, help others, you are giving, 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 and the other end of that ego is the takers, the takers. So yeah, you want to check in with what's going on with that ego's journey. There is a new way forward, or there is a way forward to be able to come back to that sacred neutral and come back to that healthy level. And it's not about destroying the ego, it's actually about integrating the ego. So many people are drawn to that self development and coaching to understand themselves better. And they're seeking those questions like, do I matter? Important to me? Rarely do they actually investigate their ego in how they're playing out the power dynamics, or in the past, when did they play the villain in other people's stories. They often go down the path of like that trauma, looking at where they played the victim or where they, how their body's doing burnout. Like a lot of the times empaths will go down a path of like, how do I have boundaries? Integrating the ego looks at both roles rather than just trying to come to that sacred neutral. You need to have that self-awareness to look at both ends of the spectrum. So coming back to that soulful version of yourself, to have that self-confidence, the self-awareness, the resilience, the empathy, the healthy boundaries, and even the assertiveness. So coming back to that neutral point of view, the observing point of view, staying out of judgment, staying out of the polarities, coming back to, again, being that sacred for the observer, asking questions rather than making conclusions. It comes back to, again, looking at your self concept to line your values up to the way that you want to live your world. So it's quite fascinating, and it's a fascinating journey to take people on within the coaching journey. Exploring the ego can really help people with, instead of being on that hustle culture, pushing, forcing to make things happen, start to raise your frequency so you manifest in what you want. So life becomes a lot funner, easier, more lighter, because you actually raise that frequency where you're not playing in the solid energy of the matrix and the heaviness that comes with it. So, well worth the journey to explore the grip that your ego has on you, and well worth exploring the coaching or the healing aspects of going back to past lives when your ego ran rampant, and also having a look at past lives where your ego just was not operating, like where you had a different perspective. And that may not be on earth, it may be a soul experience in another realm or reality. But getting the two different points of view to see what does it mean for you to raise your frequency and come into that high vibe energy. If you can follow that, you're doing quite well, because it's a dynamic conversation, and I could make plenty of videos just on one of those chapters, but hopefully this has given you a bit of a perspective on what's playing out with your ego, your intuition, raising your consciousness. I'm Claire Chancellor from Be Your Purpose, and I will talk to you later. Bye, guys.